My mother convinced my boyfriend to marry my sister. She looked him straight in the eyes and said, "She's stronger and better for you," as if I were the weakest link in my own life. When I found out, something inside me broke so cleanly, it felt like silence. So I left Philadelphia, my family, the ruins of who I used to be, and I built a life from nothing. Years later, at the grand party I hosted in Portland, my family walked through my doors smiling. But when they saw my husband, their faces turned pale, and the story truly began. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the street. Brick front, trimmed hedges, windows glowing warm at night. But inside, everything felt staged, like we were performing a version of family life meant for the neighbors more than for the people living in it. My mother, Karen, curated that illusion the way some people curated museum exhibits. Ava, my older sister, was the centerpiece. I was the quiet shadow in the corner. Ava didn't even try to shine. She just existed, and the world bent to make room for her. Teachers adored her, relatives complimented her. My mother practically orbited her. "She just has presence," she would say, brushing Ava's hair with this proud theatrical smile. Then she'd glance at me, hair pulled back, wearing jeans, usually holding a book, and the smile would fade. "Emily's smart," my dad would offer weakly. Karen would sigh. "Yes, but people don't remember smart." I used to pretend her words didn't stick. They did. Every single one. I found refuge in screens and lines of code. Programming made sense. It didn't play favorites. If you made a mistake, the system told you. If you fixed it, it worked. At home, nothing worked no matter how hard I tried. Then came Jacob. I met him in a student workspace during my junior year. He laughed easily, talked softly, and listened like what I said mattered. For a girl who'd grown up learning to take up as little emotional space as possible, it felt like sunlight after years of winter. He appreciated things my family never noticed: how I organized my notes, how I thought through problems, how I moved quietly but with purpose. When I introduced him to my family, my father shook his hand warmly. Ava smiled politely. My mother's eyes, though, flickered with an interest I didn't understand at the time. Not in Jacob as a person, no. In what Jacob represented: ambition, potential, a future that could be shaped. "It's nice to have someone steady," Karen said later, stirring her tea. "Maybe he'll bring you out of that tech cave you live in." It sounded like a compliment. It wasn't. I ignored the shift at first. I ignored the way Ava dressed up a little more when Jacob visited. I ignored Karen pulling him aside to ask about his goals, his plans, his vision. I even ignored the first time Jacob mentioned my sister in a tone that felt warmer than necessary. Because for once, I wanted a chapter of my life to go right. But deep down, something in me already knew this family never let anything of mine stay mine for long. I didn't realize when things truly began to shift. Maybe it was the day Jacob started showing up late to our study sessions with vague excuses. Maybe it was when he began checking his phone more and flipping it over whenever I walked into the room. Or maybe it was the morning he mentioned my mother's cooking, like he'd been eating at our house more often than I knew. "Your mom makes incredible roast chicken," he said casually. I froze. "You saw my parents this week?" He blinked slowly, as if searching his memory. "Oh yeah, your mom invited me over. Just to talk." Just to talk. My mother had barely asked me about my classes in months, but she had time to chat with my boyfriend? The first ember of dread lit in my stomach. It grew when I found a receipt tucked in his car console, gas from a station outside Philadelphia. He told me he'd been in New York that day. I held the receipt between my fingers, the paper warm from the sun, and every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong. When I asked him about it later, he smiled stiffly. Your mom needed help with something. She said you were busy. Busy. That was her favorite word to justify pushing me aside. She said Ava's been struggling. She could use support. Support. He said it with softness, like Ava was fragile glass, and I was a hammer. One weekend, I decided to drive home unannounced. I told Jacob I was staying in my dorm to finish a project. I needed clarity. I needed truth. I walked into my parents' house at 9 p.m. The living room lights were on, voices carried, soft, familiar, intimate. I stopped in the hallway. Ava's laugh, Jacob's voice, my mother's low, pleased hum. I leaned against the wall and peeked around the corner. There they were. Ava sitting close enough for her knee to touch his. My mother perched in her armchair like a queen, presiding over a coronation. Jacob sat between them, his face conflicted, already half convinced of something he didn't know he'd agreed to. She's stronger and better for you, my mother said, her voice honeyed. Emily will build her career no matter what. But Ava, she needs someone like you, someone successful, someone who fits. Fits. Like I was a puzzle piece she tried to sand down, but still refused to snap into place. Jacob didn't argue. He didn't defend me. He didn't even notice I was standing there, watching my world bend sideways. My breath caught in my throat, and the truth burned hotter than betrayal. This wasn't an accident. It was a plan, and I was the only one who hadn't been in on it. I don't remember leaving the house. One moment I was staring at the living room, my mother orchestrating, Ava performing, Jacob bending, and the next I was in my car gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers went numb. Philadelphia's night air pressed cold against the windows, but inside, everything felt overheated, suffocating. I didn't drive back to campus. I drove until the city thinned out, until highway lights blurred into streaks. When I finally pulled into a rest stop, the adrenaline evaporated and the grief hit. Sharp, humiliating, total. My mother hadn't just interfered. She'd replaced me, and Jacob, all he did was sit there and let her. I called the only person I trusted. Brianna, I need help. She didn't ask why. I'm coming. Within hours, I was back in my dorm, packing a small bag, while Brianna watched quietly from the doorway. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, steady. You need to get out of here for a while. Not just this dorm, this whole orbit. She was right. I withdrew from my final semester 2 days later. Professors were shocked. Advisors urged me to reconsider. But the truth was simple. I couldn't breathe in Philadelphia anymore. The betrayal didn't just break my heart. It broke the illusion I'd clung to my whole life, that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, proved myself enough, my family would eventually see me. Instead, they'd shown me exactly who they were. I packed what I could, sold what I couldn't, and I left, moving across the country with one checked suitcase and no plan other than escape. Portland felt like a foreign planet at first. The air smelled of rain and pine. People didn't know my mother. They didn't know Ava. They didn't know that the girl ordering coffee with trembling hands had just watched her life implode. Brianna's cousin let me crash in her small apartment for a few weeks. I remember lying awake on that fold-out couch, hearing the refrigerator hum, feeling the weight of failure pressing into my ribs. But pain is strange. It breaks you open in ways that make space for something new. On a quiet morning, after days of barely functioning, I stood at the window and saw the sign hitting the river. Something in me, small but stubborn, whispered, "Get up." So I did. I found a therapist, Dr. Alden, who didn't accept my polite, "I'm fine." She pushed until the truth spilled out, messy and raw. "You weren't chosen," she said once, "because your family didn't want to see your worth. That's not your failure." I applied to finish my degree in Portland. Then I built a new life, one piece at a time. Jobs, routines, friendships, stability. My world didn't rebuild quickly, but it rebuilt honestly. And slowly, anger became clarity. Clarity became strength. And strength became something dangerously close to peace. But peace didn't last. Because years later, when my father sent a quiet text about wanting to visit, everything I'd left behind began making its way back toward me. They arrived on a gray Portland afternoon. My mother stepping out of the car first like she owned the driveway, Ava behind her with sunglasses too big for her face, and Jacob slower, hesitant, looking everywhere but at me. My father came out last, thinner than the last time I'd seen him, his shoulders slightly rounded, his eyes searching for mine. Daniel stayed beside me in the doorway, steady and warm in a way that my mother's expression flickered. I saw it, the tiny flash of recalibration. She hadn't expected him. She hadn't expected this version of me. "Emily," she said with the same smile she used on neighbors she secretly judged. My, you've built quite the life." As if she hadn't destroyed the first one. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Inside our house, my house, her eyes swept across the vaulted ceilings, the river view, the warm wood tones. Everything was intentional, chosen, earned. For the first time in my life, I had home field advantage. We sat for dinner, my father quiet, Ava glancing around with thinly veiled envy, Jacob shrinking into his chair every time Daniel spoke. My mother narrated the space like she was leading a guided tour. And then Daniel asked the one question that cracked the surface. "So, when was the last time all of you were in the same room together?" My mother straightened. "The engagement party, of course." My stomach tightened. Ava stiffened. Jacob took a large sip of water, nearly choking on it. Daniel nodded, polite. That must have been difficult for Emily. The room stilled. My mother's smile thinned. Well, Emily wasn't emotionally prepared for that season of life. A season of life. Not betrayal, not sabotage. A season. I opened my mouth, but Ava spoke first. "Mom, stop," she whispered. My mother's head snapped toward her. "Excuse me?" Ava set down her fork. Her hands trembled slightly. "We're not doing this. Not here." "Ava," my mother warned, voice low. "No." But Ava didn't stop. "You need to hear this." And then impossibly, like watching a dam crack open, years of secrets spilled into the open. Emily deserves the truth. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Ava looked at me, really looked at me, and for a moment, she wasn't the golden child, the chosen one, the curated masterpiece. She looked tired, sad, human. Mom didn't just talk to Jacob. She called him repeatedly. She told him you were distracted, too ambitious, that you weren't serious about your future with him. My stomach dropped. She also told him you were talking to someone else in school, that you were planning to leave him. I never. My voice cracked. "I know," she said quickly. "I know you didn't." Jacob's face went red. "Ava." She held up a hand. "I'm not finished." My mother's jaw clenched. "Ava Harper, you will stop this right now." "No," Daniel said evenly. "She won't." The silence that followed was sharp, icy, unlike anything I had ever seen my mother confronted with. She turned her fury toward Daniel, but he didn't flinch, not once. Ava swallowed hard and continued. Mom even drafted messages on your old tablet, she confessed. She had me send them so they'd look like they came from her. I stared at her. You sent them? Tears filled her eyes. I was stupid. I believed her when she said you'd be fine, that you didn't need him, that I needed him more. Daniel reached for my hand under the table. His grip was grounding, real. And you? I asked Jacob, my voice hoarse. He finally looked up. His eyes were glassy, ashamed.
I was wrong, he said quietly. I trusted the wrong people. I should have talked to you. I should have fought for us. Instead, I let your mother decide what our future was. My father, silent until then, set his glass down with a trembling hand. Karen, he whispered, is this true? My mother exhaled sharply. I protected my daughters. I did what any mother would do. No, I said quietly. You did what served your image, what made Ava look better, what kept me small. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Ava wiped her cheeks. It's not just that, she said softly. Jacob lowered his eyes again. My mother's face tightened. Ava pressed on. Mom told Jacob his career would be stronger with someone more polished, more useful for networking. Useful, like I was a resume she was editing. My father looked gutted. Karen, how could you? But before she could answer, Daniel leaned forward slightly, his tone calm but unshakable. What you did, he said, was emotional abuse, manipulation. You didn't just sabotage her relationship. You sabotaged her future because it didn't fit your narrative. My mother's voice trembled with indignation. I will not be lectured in my daughter's home. No, I said softly, you won't. You'll listen. The room went electric. I looked at all of them, my parents, my sister, my ex, people who once were the center of my life, people who dismantled it piece by piece. You cost me years, I said. You cost me stability, my final semester, my confidence. You told me I wasn't worth choosing, but I built myself back without you. My mother scoffed, but it was weak, defensive. You left us, she snapped. No, I replied. You pushed me out. The room stayed frozen until my father spoke again. His voice was raw. Emily, I am so sorry. I knew things were wrong. I didn't stop it. That's my failure, not yours. For the first time in decades, he looked directly at my mother. This ends, he said softly. Today. Karen's expression faltered, shocked that the man who'd stayed silent all his life had finally taken a side. Daniel stood then, walking to my side. His presence alone was a declaration. I looked at each of them. When you saw my husband, your faces turned pale. This is why, not because of who he is, but because he represents the life I built without you, a life you can't control. Ava let out a quiet sob. Jacob stared at the floor. My mother grabbed her purse. We're leaving, but my father didn't move. I'm staying, he said. Emily and I, we have things to mend. My mother stared at him stunned. Then she turned and walked out. Ava followed slowly, but before she reached the door, she looked back at me. I'm done letting her control me, she whispered. I want to make things right, if you'll let me. Jacob came last. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for everything. I'll spend years being sorry, but I'm glad you found someone who sees you. Then he too walked out. The door closed. Silence. Daniel squeezed my hand. You okay? And for the first time in years, I was. In the days after the confrontation, the house felt strangely quiet, like years of noise had finally drained out. My father stayed with us for the rest of the week. We took slow walks along the river, sat on the balcony at sunset, and talked in a way we never had before.
No pretending, no tiptoeing around my mother's moods, just honesty, fragile but real. One morning, when light shimmered across the water, he said, "I spent so long trying not to make waves that I forgot how to protect the people who needed me most." His voice carried regret, but not shame. "I can't change the past, Emily, but I want to spend whatever time I have left being your dad." I reached for his hand. That's all I ever wanted. We stayed close after he returned to Pennsylvania. Weekly calls, quiet conversations, updates from the hospital. We were building something new, something ours. When he passed months later, I flew back for the funeral. Ava stood beside me. She'd left Jacob, moved into a small apartment, found a modest job. Nothing glamorous, but entirely hers. For the first time, she looked like someone choosing her life, not performing it. "Thanks for giving me another chance," she whispered. "We're all rewriting old stories," I told her. "You get to write yours, too." My mother remained distant, polite in a brittle way, restricted to the outer edge of my life, where she could no longer wound me. And that boundary alone felt like victory. Back in Portland, with Daniel's hand in mine and a life built from my own strength, I understood something simple and profound. I didn't win because they lost. I won because I healed. When I look back now, I don't think about the betrayal. I think about the rebuilding. I think about the woman I became once I stopped waiting to be chosen and started choosing myself. My mother's schemes didn't break me. They revealed me. And the life I have today proves it. If you've ever survived family betrayal or had to rebuild from nothing, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be.